Significant shortcomings but no corruption. That was the finding of the Auditor General's report into the controversial $11.5 million Saudi sheep deal. The 15-month investigation into the deal, which saw cash, livestock and agricultural equipment given to a Saudi livestock importer, was released this afternoon. The Foreign Minister, Martin McCulley, says he's confident the agreement removed a major obstacle holding back progress on a free trade deal with the Gulf. Checkpoint invited the Minister onto the program but has yet to hear back from his office, so we probably think that that's a no. But Labour's Shadow Attorney General David Parker joins us now from our gallery office. Welcome to Checkpoint, David. Look, the Attorney General has said there was no corruption here. People started brandishing the C word, I thought, about 15 minutes ago. So if there's, 15 months ago. So if there's no corruption, what is there?
Oh, there's a terrible, shabby $4 million cash payment to a man who wasn't owed any money by government. Or anyone else in New Zealand, in order to effectively pay him off to facilitate a free trade agreement with the Gulf states. That's been our allegation all along. I think for the government to claim exoneration because Mr McCulley is not guilty of the crime of corruption, which has never been my allegation, is just wrong. Have we reached such a low bar that immorally paying $4 million to a man who wasn't owed any money, lying to the public, covering up the $4 million payment, misleading Parliament and journalists? You know, is that now okay in New Zealand? I don't think it is.
Can we come back to the phrase lying to the public? What was the lie? Where's the lie?
Well, initially the only payment that was disclosed to the public was the $6 million payment for this farm in the desert. And Matthew Hooton started to say, well, this doesn't make sense. This is really about trying to facilitate a trade deal. The government denied that. They, under pressure from us in the House and also from other journalists, then disclosed a $4 million payment. They said the $4 million payment was to settle a legal claim or a legal risk that had been caused by the prior government. It was just not true.
Yes, when you and Matthew Hooton find yourself on the same side, things have gone pear-shaped, haven't they? The bigger question is then, what was the end game? What was going on here and why?
The government was trying to get across the line a free trade agreement with Saudi Arabia. And in order to do that, they were willing to pay a $4 million cash payment plus $6 million for a farm in the desert, plus $1 million on flying sheep to Saudi Arabia, all for the benefit of Mr Al-Khalaf, who was a good friend of the Minister of Agriculture in Saudi Arabia and was getting in the way of the free trade agreement. It's just unprincipled. You shouldn't do that sort of thing.
And yet there is a suggestion this afternoon, and I'm not entirely convinced that the government is explicitly going along with that version of events, but the bigger picture that we're getting out of the beehive is that the end justifies the means.
Well, why did they lie to the public and to Parliament in the meantime and try and pretend that the $4 million payment to Mr Al-Khalaf was justified because of a legal risk? They told me and others in the former Labour government that we should be ashamed of ourselves for having created this legal risk. The Auditor General records that the documents did not properly describe the proper nature of this agreement, and the pretence in the cabinet paper that there was a legal risk was not backed up by one iota of legal advice either internally from MFAT or from external services.
Okay, so if you were misled and if you were fed insufficient, inadequate and incomplete information, it seems on the face of it the Cabinet was too. This is really confusing. If we look at this Cabinet Minister...
Well, they were told that there was a legal risk that didn't exist.
Over and over and over this is referred to, the shortcomings of the Cabinet paper, the lack of transparency, the lack of clarity. Treasury recommending over and above it to the Minister of Finance that he not support the proposal. Was McCulley operating unilaterally here? Who was he working with? What was going on?
Well, he was just making poor decisions and improper decisions. You know, the fact that he can claim exoneration because he isn't guilty of the crime of corruption is no defence. You know, it's the bar so low in New Zealand that for a minister to be kicked out, he has to be in the dock for a crime. I mean, this is amoral. You know, the Auditor General makes it absolutely clear that it's not within her remit to actually determine whether this was a proper thing to do. She's just unpicked the fact that the $4 million payment was not for to pay off a legal claim because none existed, and that the documents pretended to do something that they weren't doing. i.e., all along this was to facilitate a free trade agreement, which is what we've said.
David Parker, who's Labor's Shadow Attorney General, joining us live from the gallery office. We only have Labor's point of view on this because the government simply isn't fronting. We are trying to get Murray McCully to front. We haven't even heard back from his office.